Recently, a friend from church mentioned he wanted a display for all of his challenge coins, and I was like,
Hey! Perhaps I could be of some assistance.
so today, that's what I'm making. Stick around and check it out. So this guy has an impressive collection of challenge coins in various shapes and sizes, so I have no idea how big this thing needs to be or how wide to make the grooves. So I used some scrap wood I had laying around to make some mock-ups to make sure I had the right size display so he could have all of his coins on it. And here's what I came up with. The main part of the display where the coins are going to go is about 16 inches wide and 9 inches deep. And I'll build the front, back, and sides based off of that size. Now I'll put a link in the description for some free plans for this build in case you want to play along at home. It includes all of the overall dimensions, the angles to cut the grooves and the sides, what materials you're going to need, and step-by-step instructions. Everything you need to make a build like this or scale it to the size that you want. After discussing designs with him for a while, he decided on walnut and maple, which I think is going to look really good. And he wants personalization across the front, so I get to use my new laser. But the first thing I need to do is get this wood to its final dimensions, which consists of the standard cutting, planing, and sanding. And I made sure to save the cutoffs because I'm going to need those later. I had to be very selective about the board that I picked out based on the grain pattern, and unfortunately that meant the board that I picked out was too narrow. So the next thing I need to do is glue them together to get the depth I'll need for the display. I'm going to use these cawls to make sure they stay flat. It's probably unnecessary, I just like to do this as an additional insurance policy. I'm also going to use Titebond Quick and Thick so it'll dry faster and I can keep working. Now that I've got the boards out of the clamps, the next step is to cut the grooves where the coins are going to sit. Now, based on the angle that the final display will be, I've determined that 15 degrees is the best angle to cut so that the coins sit back just a little bit and don't sit straight up. Now, because I fit all of the coins in the mock-up, I'm going to use it as my template to set up my table saw so that I make the final version exactly like it. I'm also going to cut the front and back at 35-degree angles to make it mate up with the front and back boards. While I have the table saw set to that, I'll cut the front and back boards to size so that they're ready to glue together. Before I glue everything together, I need to personalize the front board. You can do this if you have a laser, but you can also do it with something like a heat pin. I'll put a link in the description to one of those. And if you want to freehand it, you can do it with a wood burner as well. For me, I'm going to use my new laser to get the job done. While the laser was burning his name, I used some 120 grit sandpaper to ease over the edges of the grooves. I cut an angle on this narrow piece of MDF so I could get the sandpaper in the bottom of the grooves to clean up the saw marks. I fine-tuned the angle for the front piece to make sure it was a perfect fit and made the cut on a piece of scrap just to make sure I had it dialed in perfectly before making the final cut. Now this was a complicated glue up just because of all the angles, so all my cutoffs made my life a lot easier. And while you're watching me do that, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's video, the Patriot-Maker shop. It's been a long time coming, but I finally released my first line of merchandise, and I'm super excited. I've got shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, and that's just my first line of merchandise. There's a whole lot more to come. So if you enjoy my content and find value in it and would like to show your support, head on over to my shop, the link is in the description, and pick something up. I really appreciate it. I glued up the front and back separately just so I could have more control over the positioning of the pieces, and I'm glad I did because I had to use a lot of clamps to make sure each part behaved and stayed where it was supposed to while the glue dried. Once the front and back dried, it was time to get the sides to their final shape. I wanted a 1/2 inch reveal on the top, front, and back, so I scribed a line and used my track saw to cut it to size. Then I used this curve pattern thingy to get a nice curve on the front and back. cut out the bulk on the bandsaw, and sanded it to the line using my homemade belt sander table. Then I rounded over all the sides but the bottom and fine-tuned the edges by hand sanding. I attached the sides using screws, which I countersunk and pre-drilled so I didn't split the wood. Then I cut some plugs out of a maple cutoff and glued and hammered them in. Once the glue was dry, I used some painter's tape to keep the flush trim saw from messing up the walnut. All that was left before finishing was a quick sanding. For the finish on this project, I just used a few coats of Danish oil to make the grain pop and show the contrast between the maple and the walnut. And that wrapped up the project. All right, so it's time for the debrief. There are 3 main lessons I learned this time, 2 of which I want to sustain, do again in the future, 1 of which I definitely want to change and improve upon. The first lesson is to make sure that the customer is clear on what he's getting and that he's happy with the final result. This may mean sending him pictures from online of ones that are already made, something like a conceptual picture, or drawing it up in SketchUp so that they can at least understand what it's going to look like. You also want to come to an agreement on price and try to get half of it up front so you can use that money to buy the materials. A lot of people really like to make contracts which detail what the product's going to be, how long is it going to take, how much will it be, and details that protect you, the woodworker, like consequences if the customer makes changes midway through the project. Bottom line, agree on the details with the customer before you start the build. Lesson number 2 is the use of a mock-up, also known as a model, or kind of like a story stick. That's what I did here. Sometimes, like for this project, you're gonna wanna make a mock-up of what you're gonna be making for your final product. In my case, making a mock-up really helped because I needed to know how big it needed to be to hold all the coins, and it helped me understand the angles I needed to cut so the coins would display the way I wanted them to. And finally, working with a mock-up is even better than hard copy plans because I could measure the mock-up, then measure my board before I made the cut. And I also used it to get the right angle on the grooves and other cuts. It took all the guesswork out of building this project and minimizes the chance of messing something up. The third lesson I learned was with the plug cutter that I used. Now I have no idea where I got this thing from, and it's hot garbage. I got it out of the package just for this project. It was sitting with my other drill bits, and it burned the wood no matter how slowly or quickly I went or how fast or slow I set the drill press speed to. So needless to say, I'll be buying me a new set of quality plug cutters for my next project. So bottom line, make sure you buy quality tools. Okay, so that was the 3 major lessons I learned during this project. So now let's load it up and see what it looks like. I gotta be honest, this thing really impressed me in how it turned out. I love the contrasting woods. I like the personalization as well, and I really think he's gonna like it. Well, that's it for this video. We'll see you next time.